Hi, AP Psych. These are the Module 56 Psychodynamic Theories and Modern Views of the Unconscious Notes. So, this is our next module in our unit on personality. You'll notice, since this is for Monday, that this week is all new content, Monday through Thursday. So, we'll basically be going through a module a day. But then after Thursday, there will be no more new content. You'll have an assignment on Friday. It's listening to a podcast that I think you guys will enjoy. And then Monday and Tuesday is working on your project. And then the middle of next week, we move into review. So please, I know it's so difficult when you're home to keep going and getting these assignments done, but I promise try and make it as painless as possible. Hopefully, you find it interesting. You're going to be taking some personality tests on Wednesday. I think you guys will enjoy those. And here we go. The essential question again is, how do psychologists explain personality? Our learning targets are: I can compare and contrast psychoanalytic theories of personality with other theories. I can identify frequently used assessment strategies. Today, the focus will be on projective tests and evaluate relative test quality based on reliability and validity of the instruments. So we'll get a little review on reliability and validity today. And then additionally, I can identify key contributors to personality theory. We'll be looking at Adler, Jung, as well as one other, Horney today as well. So first, psychodynamic theories, what you should remember before even looking at the rest of the words on the slide is that it's going to be very similar to psychoanalytic. So what we're going to be looking at here is both how is it similar to psychoanalytic, and then how do they diverge from Freud's original thoughts. So this more modern day approach views personality with a focus on the unconscious, so that unconscious mind is still relevant here, and the importance of childhood experiences. So, in the ways that it's similar to Freud, is there's still these personality structures of id, ego, superego. That's still under psychodynamic. There's still a focus on the unconscious mind. And they do mention anxiety and these defense mechanisms when there's conflicts, when there's unresolved issues in the unconscious, you might experience anxiety. And that's where those defense mechanisms from Friday might come into play. Where they differ, though, is there's more emphasis on the role of the conscious mind in psychodynamic theory, as well as an interpretation of experience and emotions. And then finally, to put it bluntly, there's less focus on those psychosexual stages that we talked about last week, and less focus on aggression as being kind of the all-consuming motivations, as we saw with psychoanalytic. So we're going to be looking at 3 neo-Freudians. So they would all fall under the psychodynamic rather than psychoanalytic theorists. So the first 2 are Alfred Adler and Karen Horney. Yes, I know what her last name looks like, how it should be pronounced, but it's Horney is the correct pronunciation. Okay. So first is Adler. And Adler, if you've ever heard of someone having an inferiority complex, that's from Alfred Adler. So he believed that our behavior, and really think about our personality, is driven by efforts to conquer our childhood anxiety that were caused by feeling inferior. So feeling like you won't measure up, feeling like you won't be good enough. Okay. Where Karen Horney, said that our childhood anxiety kind of stems back to this desire for love and security. Okay, so a little bit different. So Adler, really the key thing you need to remember about him is this feeling of inferiority or having an inferiority complex and how that plays into our personality. And then for Horney is this desire for love and security. The other thing about Horney is one thing I didn't really mention last week with Freud was Freud believed that women especially, that part of their issues were caused by what he called penis envy, that women had this unconscious desire to be like men, including anatomical parts and all. And instead, Horney said that is not true. Women do not have penis envy, and instead, it kind of turned it back on Freud and said that she thought men had womb envy instead. Okay. So, where do they agree with Freud? So, kind of the common theme here is that what happens in our childhood is important in terms of personality development. Okay. They also believed that it was childhood social tensions. Notice, not sexual, no mention of those psychosexual stages here, are also important to personality development. Our third neo-Freudian, this is someone that you may have heard of. I'm guessing you have in your English classes when talking about literature. Okay, this is Carl Jung. So I know it looks like Jung, but it's pronounced with a Y sound, so Jung. Okay. So at first, Jung was a follower of Freud, believed in Freud's psychoanalytic theories, but then later became a critic. So where he agrees again is this idea of the unconscious, that the unconscious mind is a very powerful influence over our thoughts and feelings. And unlike his contemporaries, Adler and Horney, he placed less emphasis on social factors. So he was really going after that unconscious. And one of the things that he placed emphasis on, he called the collective unconscious. And this is the idea that all human beings have this kind of shared reservoir of memory traces from throughout our species history. So throughout human history, kind of think of it that we all have this thread of knowledge that we were born with, that continues throughout our genealogy. And kind of the proof that he had for this, one example of his proof was what he called the archetypes. And this is probably why you may have heard of this in your literature classes before. So archetypes are images and thoughts that have universal meanings across cultures. So this is where that collective unconscious is, that throughout history, if we look at commonalities between various cultures across time, across continents, etc., we see a lot of similarities that come up, that show up in our dreams, in our literature, in our art, in our religion. Okay. So let me give you some archetypes here. Again, you do not have to have these memorized, but these are just examples of what we might see. These are all using different films to demonstrate these archetypes, like the hero, the ancient mystagogue, the enemy, the threshold guardian, the shapeshifter, the trickster. And you can see that lots of literature, movies, religion have very similar themes throughout. So Jung would say that is proof behind this idea of the collective unconscious that runs through all of us. So I have a question for you. I'd like you to explain the similarities and differences between Freud's psychoanalytic theory that we talked about last week and these neo-Freudian Adler, Horney, and Jung's psychodynamic theory. So again, you're going to tell me what are the similarities and the differences. Try to do it without looking back at the slides or rewinding. Here you go. Okay, so we're going to spend a little bit of time next looking at how can we test or how can we assess unconscious processes? Like, how can you test that if it's unconscious? Okay. Here's how. We're going to talk about a type of test known as a projective test, and I will explain what that is in just a moment. Okay, so these projective tests are kind of what they sound like. So if you remember back to last week, we talked about the projective defense mechanism, where it's basically taking your emotion and kind of putting it out there onto someone else. That's kind of what these tests are going to do. And one of the tests, the second one we'll talk about, is probably one that you've heard of before. Okay. So what these are tests that have some sort of ambiguous stimuli, meaning the stimulus is something that can be interpreted in many ways. And the idea is that when looking at the stimuli, both that I'm going to show you are both visual stimuli, are designed to trigger, you to project your inner dynamics, what's going on in your unconscious, onto that thing that you're looking at. So really, they're meant to be another window into the unconscious mind, similar to like free association or dream analysis in a therapeutic setting. So the first projective test we're going to look at is called the TAT, or Thematic Apperception Test. And the way this test works is the person is presented with an image, just like what you're seeing here, where they ask the person looking at the image to basically look at that picture and make up a story. What do you think is going on in this picture? Describe it for me. What do you think happened before? What do you think will happen next? And the idea is that whatever you talk about as you're looking at this image is really a window into your unconscious mind. So I'm going to show you a couple of them. I am going to have you write. There is no right or wrong answer. Afterwards, I'm not going to tell you, oh, no, that's the wrong thing, but I will talk about it a little bit. So here's our first picture. You're going to take a look, and then you're going to tell me, what do you think is happening in the picture? Okay, so it's a little harder not getting to be in the classroom and asking for volunteers, but some things I've heard in the past is she walked in, well, I'll tell you mine, that she walked in, she found that this is a wife, this is the husband, that she walked in and found him in bed with another woman that's here and you can't see, and she turns and walks out and is trying to gather herself here. Okay, that's my interpretation. Other people have said that the man in the bed is dead. Some people have said that he's passed out, that maybe he was out drinking the night before, and she's upset because she told him to stop drinking. There could be lots and lots and lots of different things. So the way this would be approached by a psychologist, a mental health professional, is depending on what that person says, is an insight into maybe what's going on with them. Maybe there's a fear, underlying fear, and depending on what you say, can help to unveil what that fear is. I'll give you another example. This one I'm not going to have you pause to type in, but just another example of an image that would be used for the thematic apperception test. So again, they'd have them look at it, tell me what's going on. What do you think happened before this picture? What do you think is happening next? Etc. The second, probably most popular, not probably, it is the most widely used projective test, and the one that you've probably heard of before, is the Rorschach ink blot test. This was designed by Herman Rorschach, and again, it seeks to identify people's inner feelings, what's going on in their unconscious, by analyzing their interpretations of these ink blots. So there are 10 ink blots altogether. I'm going to show you 5 of them. If you Google, you can see the rest. And again, what would happen is the person in the therapeutic setting would show this ink blot, and they'd ask the person, tell me what you see. And the idea is that you take whatever is in your unconscious and project it onto these images. So for example, now that you've had a chance to look at it, I don't want to taint your thinking yet, but for this first image, what I see is someone on a motorcycle, like on a Harley. This would be them like coming face on. So this is the front tire. This is their feet. Kind of think of their feet, the bottoms of their feet. This is a handlebar. This is a handlebar. And think of it kind of a low riding Harley, arms up at the top, and they're coming towards you. Let me show you a few others. So here you go. And what the cards do have are some things that people commonly say, things that people commonly see, but there is no ultimate answer key. There's nothing that says, like for example, with this image on the left, if you see 2 garden gnomes, their little gnome hats here, kneeling and giving high fives in the middle here, then it means this about your unconscious. Okay, there's no exact science to these Rorschach tests, and that's going to be important here in a minute. Here's a couple more cards. There you go. If you want to have fun, show these to some family members. Say, hey, what do you see? And see if you see the same thing. Odds are you might have some commonalities, but they can also widely vary in people's responses. So I'm going to bring us around to something that our learning target said about reliability and validity, but this is a great chance to review. These are two terms that are highly likely to come up. They apply to things like intelligence testing. They apply to things like research methods. So this is a good review. So I want you to tell me, what does it mean for a test to be valid? And then what does it mean for a test to be reliable? Okay, so you're going to dig deep here. We talked about these last in our intelligence unit. So go ahead and respond. Okay, so hopefully what you had is, for a test to be valid, it means the test actually tests what it's supposed to. So if you're taking a instrument or a test on personality, that's actually testing something about personality. Okay. Reliability means I should get similar results if I test that person again, or if I give an alternate version of the test. Okay. So reliable means my results should not change significantly over giving the test multiple times. Okay. So now think about, with these two projective tests, do you think they're valid and do you think they're reliable? Okay. So here's what clinicians say. And these are people that use them. There are still people, these tests are still in use by some clinicians, and here's why. Some say that it's still a very helpful diagnostic tool, that it can give suggested leads as to where this person's issues may lie, that it's a revealing interview technique, and that if we aid people's responses by running them through like computer databases and use a computer as a tool to help, that it improves agreement amongst raters. Okay, that would be improving reliability, and it helps to enhance the validity of the test. Okay, here's the critics' views. That only a few of the test-derived scores have validity. Like, for example, they could be good indicators, valid indicators for things like hostility and anxiety. I'm looking at someone's answers. However, they are not reliable, that their results are inconsistent. That if you gave the same person the test multiple times, they may change what they see, they may change their story, etc. And it may diagnose a normal adult as having some sort of mental illness just based on that projective test. So it's certainly something to be mindful of. Again, there are still clinicians that use them as reliable and valid tools, but kind of the overall thought that is that projective tests are not the most reliable nor the most valid assessment of personality. So my question is for you, how would you respond if a mental health professional wanted to use Rorschach cards with you in a therapy session? So I'm going to give you a moment to respond. Okay, so there is no right or wrong answer. Maybe some of you would say, yeah, just because I'm curious what they're going to say about me. And others of you might have said, no, thank you. I don't want someone doing something that's not reliable, hasn't proved to be valid. Like, why waste my time? And really, either way is perfectly acceptable to answer. We have just a little bit left, and this is looking at the modern unconscious mind, meaning where are we today? This modern view of the unconscious is still acknowledging that we have parts of our mind, parts of our brain that we don't have access to. There's things that are processed within our brains that are happening outside of our awareness. And I'll give you some examples of this in a moment. Okay. This does not mean that most modern clinicians, psychologists, psychiatrists are really looking at repressed thoughts or desires. Okay, there are some, but not most. But where we do see evidence of this unconscious mind are things like schemas. We don't even think about it, but we group like things that we see as similar together. We know that we can be primed to stimuli, like I did with you a while back, where I put all of those words kind of related to sleep. And lots of you wrote down sleep as a term you remembered seeing, even though it wasn't there. We know we have implicit memories. Think about things that are classically conditioned, memories of how to do skills that I don't think about the step by step of what to do every time I go to walk, or every time I go to drive, or every time I go to read. Okay. We know that sometimes we can act emotionally before cognition has taken place. We just talked recently about implicit prejudices. And think about anything done on autopilot. I used the example in the very first unit of an implicit memory or automatic processing when you have lost something and you're able to retrace your steps. Okay. So unconscious in general, still a very accepted thing in these regards. Where it would differ is saying that all of our personality is based on our past, our unconscious mind, our childhood. So I have one last question for you. I don't have any multiple choice for today. Is what are the similarities and differences between how Freud viewed the unconscious and the modern view? And once you have that, just kidding. I have two more things that don't go. I forgot. I'm sorry. Okay. So let's give you a moment to write that, and then I'll come back. Okay. So again, hopefully you wrote something like Freud viewed the unconscious as kind of the center of where personality originates. That has to do with kind of those deep, dark secrets, those childhood experiences, the things that would bring us shame. Where the modern view is accepting that there's some parts of our mind that we don't have access to that help us to do things like with memory, with automatic processing, with grouping things together into schemas, etc. Okay, just a couple more things to cover under this unit. Next is the false consensus effect. So this is our tendency to overestimate the extent to which others share our beliefs and our behaviors. And this is related to Freud's defense mechanisms, such as projection. So for example, if you cheat on your taxes or you speed all the time, we might falsely convince ourselves that other people do it just as much as we do. Like, oh, everybody speeds, everybody cheats, everybody smokes marijuana. Okay, think about all those things that we tell ourselves. And we also have the false consensus effect. If we think a person is kind and trustworthy, we think that other people view them the same way. If you look at political candidates or people that are in office, if you have a certain view about a candidate or an elected official, you might think that everybody feels the same way. Think of someone really polarizing like our president. However you feel about the president, the false consensus effect says we tend to overestimate that more people think like we do. And then finally, this is one of the things that could also help motivate and shift our personality. It's something called terror management theory. I just listened to a podcast about this actually not too long ago. And this is the idea that a lot of our behavioral responses, a lot of our emotions are kind of tied into this idea of understanding that at some point we're not going to be alive anymore. And because of this changes how we respond. Okay. So it explores people's emotional and behavioral responses to reminders of their impending death. That's what makes things like what's going on now really difficult, as we start hearing news stories. Maybe we start knowing people who have been directly affected, and having that personal connection kind of brings our own mortality to the forefront. Okay. This relates back to Freud's idea of the unconscious, because we're always trying to defend ourselves against this anxiety. Okay? If people feel threatened by death, then they try to enhance their self-esteem and cling more strongly to worldviews that answer questions about the meaning of life. So we seek close relationships. That could be why we have such a difficult time right now, social distancing, and why it's so hard to keep people in their homes and keep people from going and spending time with others, especially if we're feeling threatened right now. Our tendency is to try to gather to those that we love, try to bind to those relationships. This is also related to religious sentiments, why people um, cling so much to their religious beliefs, as it helps reduce that anxiety of what comes after death based on what your religion tells you. So, that is all for today's notes for psychodynamic. On Tuesday, we will explore personality from a humanistic perspective. We're going to come back around to our two buddies, Maslow and Rogers, tomorrow. Have a great Monday. Don't forget, I have some office hours from 12:30 to 1, and again from 3:30 to 4. Have a great day.